Okay, I think everyone is currently in. I'm sure more people will keep filtering in. I'm going to pass it to my colleague Rachel Small, World Beyond Wars Canada organizer, to kick off this next session.
Hello, welcome back, everyone who has been attending previous parts of this conference, and welcome to the folks who are just now tuning in for the first time with us this weekend. I'm really so honored to get to host this panel that is just about to begin because it's really bringing together organizers and thinkers whose work that they do individually, but also sort of in collective and in organizations, I really admire and take a lot of inspiration from. These are folks who come from the intersections of lots of different movements on three different continents. And together today, I'm really hoping that we'll be able to explore how our struggles are connected, from ending policing and prisons to abolishing border enforcement and war, from Palestinian liberation to internationalism to deep solidarity and queer and trans liberation. It's always a pleasure when we can learn from each other's movements and contexts and losses and victories and have these spaces where we can really talk about how can we win and how can we win together. So I am so thrilled to be welcoming these wonderful speakers into this space and for all of you who are joining us here from all over the world. Feel free, as always, if you'd like to use the chat to kind of introduce yourself or share where you're joining from. It's always nice to know who's here with us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually just introduce each speaker before they speak. And then afterwards, we'll open up a discussion for them to ask each other questions. Maybe I'll throw in some questions, and we'd also love to hear questions from the audience. Feel free to use the chat, but if there's questions you really want me to pose to the panelists from you, please do use the Q&A box so that we can keep those organized. So first, without further ado, I'm so thrilled to introduce and welcome up Dean Spade, who has been working to build queer and trans liberation and policing, border enforcement, and war for the past over 25 years. He's the author of Normal Life, Administrative Violence, Critical Trans Politics, and the Limits of Law, and Mutual Aid, Building Solidarity During This Crisis and the Next. They're two excellent books. I can't recommend them heartily enough. And is also the director of Pinkwashing Exposed, Seattle Fights Back. His newest book is Love in a Fucked Up World, How to Build Relationships, Hook Up, and Raise Hell Together. I can't wait to read it. And he also has a podcast by the same name, so it's called Love in a Fucked Up World. Truly cannot recommend it enough. I hope you all will look it up and listen to it. But meanwhile, please welcome me and please join me in warmly welcoming Dean Spade to the stage.
Thank you so much. I'm going to set a timer because I want to stick to our plans so we can hear from each other. I'm so grateful to the organizers for organizing this conference and more broadly this group doing this work. And so moved to be in a room with people who are doing anti-war work all over the world. I'm tuning in from Berlin. Okay. What I want to talk about. So yeah, like Rachel was saying, I've been in the queer and trans liberation movement for my whole adult life. And specifically, I'm in the part of that movement that has been like anti-war, anti-police, that has centered issues of poverty and racism and anti-imperialism. Part of the reason that matters is because like the mainstream kind of gay movement that emerged or like gay advocacy that emerged especially in the 90s and 2000s is actually like pro-war, pro-police, pro-marriage, like, it really went in the wrong direction. And that's the one that got like all the funding and all the like kind of visibility, that's like, it's so amazing. We got a trans police officer in our town, or it's so incredible that, we want gay and trans people to be soldiers. So just in case that formulation is new for anyone, right? That we have like an anti-war, anti-police kind of wing of the queer and trans movement, and that one's less visible, especially in the US, but also globally, than the kind of like the one that has a bunch of talking points that are more aligned with that's state projects, where you see like cops with like, gay flags on their helmets and like on the, all over the world, cops with like gay flags on their cop cars and, this kind of rebranding of war as something that saves queer people and women from like bad regimes. This is called pinkwashing sometimes. And I just put in the chat a link to a movie that's kind of a pinkwashing 101 movie that might be useful for some people, and it's free to watch and show in your own community and good for like sharing with like students and people who want to think about that stuff. So what I want to talk about with my time today, I'm going to share my screen. I've got a few slides. Let's see. Easier said than done, you know what I mean? I do know how to do this. Let me just get to the right one. Okay. What I want to talk about today is a little bit about how important abolition is for not falling into anti-solidarity traps in our work. Like that's one of the things that's so difficult is that it's uh, I think Andrea Ritchie was speaking at this conference earlier today, I believe, or maybe it was yesterday. And one of the things Andrea says so clearly, I'm not going to do her justice, is that like criminalization is like the way that fascism is imposed. It's like that is like the work of cops and immigration enforcement agents and corrections officers and people who run the child policing, the family policing system where kids get taken away from their families. Like all of those agents are actually agents of fascism. And if we ignore criminalization, we often end up accidentally pushing for change in ways that reify and legitimize the very things that will that will cause all the problems that will hurt our people in our lives. So like one example I was thinking about of this was, I don't know how much people followed this, but there's been an ongoing campaign for many years in the US called End the Deadly Exchange. And it's a campaign to draw attention to the fact that US law enforcement agents, like police, often train in Israel with the IDF and to stop that. And so this campaign to me is really brilliant. I've worked on it a lot, trying to support it in different ways. And it's really brilliant because it takes the fact that people domestically in the US are rising up against policing and like especially like the racism and hideous violence of policing against people with disabilities and against queer and trans people and poor people, immigrants. It takes that and it helps people tie it, to help people like internationalize that politics and see that there is such a strong relationship between the US and Israel generally, but also between the methods of policing and hurting and enforcing colonialism and racism across these different jurisdictions, like literally the same companies, like, making the technologies, et cetera. And this campaign is so important. And when we were first launching this campaign, one of the things we talked a lot about was how important it was to make it an abolitionist campaign. Because you could imagine the danger. We could just be in there in the Seattle City Council, and Seattle's where I usually live, being like, don't let our cops train in Israel. Keep our cops good like American cops or some, you know what I mean? Like it could become a pro-police, you could accidentally produce a legitimizing pro-police talking point by accident if you didn't clarify in your organizing that you are in solidarity with all the work against all policing. Um, or this comes up sometimes. People are like, demilitarize the police. It's bad that the police in the US have tanks and all these extreme weapons. You know what? As Miriam Kaba, one of the smartest anti-police organizers in the US, always says, like, even when all they had was a baton, they still did the same things with it. So it's not really like, yes, we wanted to get rid of all their weapons. We need to get rid of the whole thing. They achieve this no matter which weapons they have. They achieve this kind of pacification of the population, brutal colonial racist enforcement. So that's just an example of, right, like when we're doing our organizing, including anti-war, anti-colonial, anti-imperial organizing, we're trying to do it in a way, if we don't do it in a way that is consistently abolitionist, we run into these anti-solidarity traps. And when we do it in an abolitionist way, we get this beautiful, I love this slogan, safety through solidarity. People have a deep question, how to be safe. And we are sold borders and police and prisons as the way to be safe. And it doesn't make us safe. It hurts our communities so much, as we know, and especially some people more than others. So this deeper message of like, wow, what if we were in solidarity across all these different siloed areas of organizing and helping build a different story in our cultures about safety through solidarity? Okay. I also wanted to share, okay, this is like a terrible screenshot, but basically I wanted to show you guys this website because it's another example of it. Another like kind of common trap around is like, people wanting police reforms that'll make the police softer. So this is a project I worked on with a bunch of really smart people. It's called the Abolition and Disability Justice like Collective or something. I can't remember what we call ourselves. And we were talking about this model of like reforms to avoid because we saw, especially in the uprising in 2020, people being like, we should have cops that act like social workers. And we were like, you know what? Social workers act like cops. We don't actually want more of that, right? So if we fail to be abolitionists, we end up asking for yucky reforms that basically just replace policing with a different kind of system of control, like mandatory mental health services or things like that. So this is another example of this kind of how do we use abolitionism to avoid falling into a trap of legitimizing systems that we're actually trying to get rid of. So what I want to talk about now is this tool, which you can also get for free online, I think is useful. I developed with some people recently. We developed this in the wake of the indictment of um, dozens and dozens of activists in Atlanta who were fighting against the cop city, the kind of this big police infrastructure expansion in Atlanta, Georgia. What happened was these 61 activists were all indicted. They'd all had different parts of they were doing different parts of the campaign. Some people were building websites, and some people were having gatherings, and some people were camping out in the forest to kind of occupy the space and stop the cops from coming. It's been this really intense campaign, very brilliant, very multi-tactic. The police have brutally attacked it. People have been killed. It's really intense. Um, and a lot of people have been criminalized, including this indictment of 61 people. And so one of the things that happens when there's a lot of repression is that people make these accidental anti-solidarity talking points that are not abolitionist. And so these are traps people fall into. So we made this tool, 5 questions to ask yourself if you're talking about repression, which is really important right now because there's like repression coming down super hard on the Palestine liberation movement all over the world and on all of our other anti-racist, anti-imperialist, anti-colonial movements. So these questions are the same kind of intervention that I'm sharing that I want to just give you these 5 questions. Does the thing I'm saying pretend the US or whatever legal system you're in is fair? Like, is there something I'm saying? Like, one of the ways this comes up in the US a lot is people will be like, this repression violates free speech. We live in a country that guarantees that we all have free speech. No, actually, we don't. We live in a country that has always had very selective enforcement around speech. And so that sometimes when we kind of exceptionalize the current moment and say the system is fair and good, we're actually doing like PR for the system. And we're stepping out of solidarity with all the other people who are being repressed and have been repressed. We can just as easily say, this repression is just like these other things that are happening and have been happening. This system is actually like really unfair, really corrupt. So this move of not making talking points that pretend the system is fair. This is similarly, this happens around universities and colleges. Whenever there's repression on college campuses, which there have been in every anti-war movement that I know of, people are like, oh my God, academic freedom is being violated. Universities are a place of free exchange of ideas. They're not. They are places that are highly curated in terms of who gets hired, who gets to go to school there, what is taught. It's not as if anybody can walk into a university and say whatever they want. And so there's other ways we can oppose repression without like creating a pretense that the system itself is fair. Universities repress student and faculty and staff organizers and communities as part of their work. They're, in so many ways. They're tied into the war machine. This is probably the most important one I want to name here. It's very easy for people doing work organizing protests and rallies and things like that then get repressed by the police to say something along the lines of, but we were peaceful protesters or we were nonviolent protesters. This is like very typical, even like, like news journalists who I admire still will say this. They'll say the word peaceful. I would like us to cut that out of our conversation. It suggests that there are some protesters who should be criminalized. And there are none that should be criminalized. And also, as my friend Peter Gelderloos says in his work, which I really recommend, anytime you do a tactic that is effective, they will criminalize it. So if we're not doing anything that they're criminalizing, we're not doing anything. You know what I mean? We're not trying to convince these people to stop making wars. They know that war is bad for, children and living things, right? They're doing it anyway. We're trying to stop them. So we will need to engage in bold tactics, and some people will need to break laws and rules, and we will be called violent and criminalized, and we need to stand together with anybody who's getting called those things or criminalized, not be like, oh no, they weren't with us, And this whole logic that somehow if people come to our protests and rallies and do something bold, like smash an ATM or push over a trash can or throw a tear gas canister back at a cop, that somehow they're provoking the police is victim blaming. We've done nothing to provoke the police. We need to understand what the police are, right? Like they are a danger to our people. They are a form of war against all people. They are a pacification method. We will not be pacified by them. Everybody doesn't have to do the same tactics, but we have to stand in solidarity with all the people who are on our side, especially those who take bigger risks. So yeah, we got to get out of this good, bad. Make sure we're not like, oh no, how could they have attacked the nonviolent protests? Like, what does that word even mean? The police will say everything we do, they'll call violent, and everything they do, they call not violent. The biggest source of violence in the world, of course, are governments, right? That are producing all these weapons that are caging our people. Um, I'm looking at my time, very close to the end. Okay. Does what I'm saying reinforce any tropes the cops are using against our people? You know, are they calling us anarchists? And then we're like, no, no, we weren't anarchists. No. If they call us anarchists, we should say, yeah, we're all anarchists. If they call us terrorists, we should say, fine. You know, like we need to stand in solidarity with whoever they are calling those names instead of trying to look legitimizable through their tropes. The final one I'll mention is, does it make it seem like there's only a procedural problem? This is a bigger problem for people like me, lawyers and legal workers. We have this tendency to be like, this repression wasn't good because it was after the statute of limitations, or they should have filed this other paper. And we really want to avoid missing the forest for the trees. If you're in front of a judge, yes, say that kind of stuff. But if you're actually talking, like in our communities or to the press about repression, we don't want, like, the system is illegitimate. The system of criminalizing people and the system of making war is illegitimate. And so the problem can't just be that they didn't follow their own procedures. This is a really big problem in places like the US right now, where there's a lot of liberalism that's like, oh no, the rule of law is being violated. That's the problem with the Trump regime. Even when they deport you under the rule of law, it's still unacceptable. Even when they cage you and you had a defense attorney, it's still unacceptable. Even when they make war and somehow Congress approves it, no, we're against it. So we want to get away from legalisms that legitimize these systems. And I think it's a danger in some of our own work that we end up making these moves. And I think abolitionism really gives us a route out of it. And we can talk about it more, but that's the few thoughts.
Thank you so much, Dean. That was fascinating. You covered like a ton of material, actually, very quickly. Very impressive. Can you name those 5 questions again? There were some questions in the chat about like, oh shoot, what were the 5? And
I'll put them in the chat.
That would be amazing, just so people can like refer back to them, because I think you explained them so well. I have about 5 follow-up questions, but I'm gonna hold back. I'm gonna be so happy to introduce our next speaker, and then we'll come back around to questions I know we all have about them. Next, I'm so happy to be able to introduce Hajera Begum, who is an activist who has campaigned around issues of anti-racism, state repression, solidarity with Palestine. She organized with Abolitionist Futures, a collaboration of community organizers and activists in the UK and Ireland who are working together to build a future without prisons, police, and punishment. For folks who haven't heard of Abolitionist Futures, recommend looking them up after we're done here today. She's written articles on policing, co-developed educational programs on the history of anti-racism organizing, on South Asian internationalism, and has just done such incredible work across movements. So please welcome me. Please, I'm not going to be able to say this phrase. Please, again, join me in warmly welcoming Hajera to the stage.
Thank you so much, Rachel. It's always awkward having someone just like talking about everything that you've done in that way. But yeah, thank you to the organisers for inviting Abolitionist Futures for this panel. It really does feel like such an honour to be amongst comrades, and I hope my contributions and all of our contributions here is important. It kind of answers the question of how we can win together. It feels really daunting to be following Dean. I don't know if you saw me nodding along so hard to everything you were saying, and just like the beautiful way that you broke down the idea of reformist versus abolitionist changes. So yeah, beautiful. I'm speaking today from Britain. Living here and also speaking at a conference that's been organised from the US, I felt like there was a duty for us to consider the realities of what our states not only impose on their own populations, but what they export to others. So yeah, as Dean very beautifully talked about, was how they fund the wars, occupations, train security forces across the globe. And it's a policing model born in the colonies that has then been exported and refined for centuries. And likewise, the very tactics used to suppress resistance abroad are then turned inwards on immigrants, migrants, workers, and racialized communities here. So when we talk about abolition in Britain or in the US, we're talking about dismantling this system that's both domestic but also imperialistic. And just thinking about that, I always find it helpful to think about the 3 pillars of policing. I'm going to be talking about Britain because that's just what I'm most familiar with, but I'm sure these examples are very much relevant and can be like literally taken and flopped down into the US. So yes, the idea of policing in Britain, that's always been very deeply entangled with the question of British Empire and its offspring, the immigration from the former colonies. One of my comrades, John Moore, wrote about the very first police force in Britain, and that was the Marine Police Office, created in 1798. Because of London slavers who were influential, they were trying to prevent London dock workers from taking the goods that they themselves had stolen from British colonies or crafted by enslaved Africans. And then meanwhile, throughout the 20th century, the senior post in Metropolitan Police, Britain's largest and most well-known police force, has served as a revolving door for officers training in the arts of colonial policing across the empire, which they often then brought back on to use on Black and Brown immigrant communities here in British mainland. A couple of examples like Kenneth Newman, who was the Metropolitan Commissioner during the 1980s, earned his stripes of policing by policing British Mandate Palestine, and also the Royal Ulster Constabulary in north of Ireland. And the strategies of policing in Britain's military occupied in the north of Ireland in the 60s, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with, a time known as the Troubles. It would then filter into policing of the mainland, like England, often being deputed in the streets with confrontations that the police were facing with Black and Asian youth. And actually, we don't even have to look that far back. Just this year, we've seen how the Metropolitan Police are purchasing and deploying Sandcat armored vehicles onto the London streets for the first time. It's the very same vehicles that has been tested already by Israeli occupation forces and were built by Israeli weapon companies. And now we see them in the streets of London. I feel like everyone in this conference probably already agrees that policing is not simply about enforcing law and order. It's about maintaining an economic and racial hierarchy, defending private property, and controlling those rendered disposable by capitalism. So I guess the bigger question to think about is how can we win together? Because when you start to think about how big all of this is, dismantling it feels like massive interlocking web. When we think about British policing to comprise of like these pillars, the ordinary domestic policing, border policing, and then security services, especially counter-terror policing, we can see how each of these modes of policing answer the question that the British ruling class have. So how can our police protect us from the consequences of our capitalism? How can our border buffer us from the boomerang effects of our colonialism? And how can our security services insulate us from the blowback of our imperialistic misadventures? And each of these policing props one another up. So they kind of form like a matrix surveillance of control, and that's legitimized by fear, racism, and a narrative of terrorism, which Dean talked about, kind of like the scapegoating of communities. So today, we can see how these three pillars collide in the policing of Palestine solidarity. The last 2 years has seen an unprecedented law and order crackdown on Palestine organizing in an attempt to rein in the outpouring solidarity with Gaza. Just weeks ago, the British Home Secretary announced plans to enable the police to impose harsher conditions on reoccurring demonstrations. So reoccurring demonstrations, the only example of that you can find right now is a direct response to Palestine protests that have been consistently being maintained since October 2023. And just thinking back, the very first days after the Al-Aqsa flood operation, the then immigration minister announced plans to revoke the visas of foreign nationals who supposedly celebrated the operation. And of course, it was Arab and Palestinian nationals who were like squarely impacted by that. We've also seen a sharp escalation in the use of counter-terror powers to corral, surveil, and arrest direct action activists. And that's culminated in the banning of a direct action group called Palestine Action, who are now labeled a terrorist organization. So in this respect, the framing of Palestine solidarity is not merely just like a public order affair, but it's turned into this national security issue to be tackled through so-called counter-terror policing. And that is significant, but it's not actually that unique. Well, I certainly did think, when I think about counterterrorism, the things that come to mind is the war on terror, and it feels like that's when it started. But British counterterrorism has a long and winding history. I'm not sure how much time I have, if I've got time to kind of go into that, but it goes all the way back to the resistance of colonial Bengal, Ireland, the Mandate of Palestine in the 20th century. And of course, all of these lessons that they learned, they then boomerang them back to British mainland. And today we see this deeply repressive powers that they've kind of given themselves enables everything from suspicionless searches to secret evidence, extended detention, segregation wings for extremist prisoners, and as well as being tangled with powers of deportation, citizenship stripping, and passport seizures. Over the past 3 decades in particular, the idea of counterterrorism, national security has kind of very much blurred the lines between policing at home and then militarism abroad. And of course, we know that that's how they get away with doing all the stopping us from having any kind of resistance to war or imperialist actions that they're doing. One of the most powerful tools in British counter-terror regime is proscription. So that's the state's ability to designate certain groups as terrorists and criminalize any forms of association with them. So under these laws, it's crime not only to materially support the group, but even to express sympathy with or share their ideas or even display a flag. Even wearing like a Palestine Action t-shirt can get you up to 14 years in prison. But we can kind of see how we've got to this point, from like Hamas military wing being banned in 2001 to the entire organization being proscribed in 2021, PFLP General Command in 2014, Hezbollah in 2019, the political wing in 2019, and now there's calls from both Labour and the Conservative, like the two main parties in the UK, to ban Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, justifying it by concerns over Iran's threat to Israel. So while Britain continued to send arms and military personnel to Israel, any expression of solidarity with Palestinian resistance is increasingly criminalized, and the law protects the oppressor and punishes those who stand with the oppressed. It criminalizes dissent and seeks to roll back a long tradition of anti-imperialist solidarity that we have here. And in this context, we can understand the decision to prescribe Palestine Action this summer. But counterterrorism isn't only just about proscription, it's also about prescription. So what do they allow? British counterterrorism policies are very much shaped by what aid they provide, development, and what diplomacy looks like. Using Palestine again as an example, the Foreign Office budget spent £10.8 million to develop security and justice services in occupied Palestinian territories, 3.3 million for accountable and responsive security services. And yeah, I can go on, the amount of millions they've spent. All of this is justified as counter-extremism and state building, but in reality, it just entrenches a political order where Palestinian security forces are forced to police their own people, and it protects British and Israeli interests. Since 2015, Britain has licensed more than £500 million in arms sales to Israel, and the same government funding policing projects in the West Bank profits from the weapons that we see devastate Gaza. And this is, I'm using Palestine as an example, but it's just how imperialism reproduces itself. Repression at home, repression abroad, each of them feeding each other. But now, like connecting the two, even as these systems intensify, the reality is that the fire of resistance has been reignited, and the ongoing genocide in Gaza has transformed public consciousness. The Palestine solidarity and anti-war movements are more deeply rooted and organizationally more durable and stubbornly persistent. Millions across Britain have taken to the streets, and many are learning or remembering that the fight for free Palestine is inseparable from the fight against borders, prisons, and war. And the same law that silenced Palestinian solidarity movements are the ones used to criminalize protests, deport migrants, strip citizenship, and police the community. So people are really starting to make those connections. And I think it's our task as abolitionist organizers to help people connect these dots, and to understand that ending Britain's role in war and occupation abroad is part of the same struggle as ending policing and incarceration at home. If colonialism, imperialism, and genocide are the glue that binds the pillars of British policing, then surely the resistance of these is what the undoing will be. The good news, I guess, if you can call it that, or the hope, the decision to ban Palestine Action as a terrorist organization has sparked the largest ever mass disobedience campaign against British counter law. It has stretched public order policing to their limits, and it has struck a blow to the ideological straitjacket. So what Dean was talking about like these terrorists are like a separate kind of extra dangerous people that we should associate ourselves with, and it's kind of really pushed public solidarity and made people think about what that means. And I would really say that there is a policing crisis in that end, and yeah, the kind of self-inflicted political crisis. By no means does that mean that the task before us is straightforward, but definitely is clear that we need to use the momentum of the Palestinian solidarity movement to build projects to counter the ironclad political consensus on militarism. And to be abolitionist in Britain is to confront the machine of empire from its center. So that's like dismantle the laws and structures that criminalize solidarity and to build a vision of safety rooted in care, equality, and freedom. Do I have time or am I?
Yeah,
I have not.
a few more minutes. Yep.
Okay, cool. I just wanted to end on a few examples of campaigns that are doing just that, what I've described. So energy embargo, and all of these are examples from the UK. So energy embargo for Palestine is pressurizing the British Museum here to cut ties with BP, the oil giant fueling both the climate crisis and the Israelis' war machine, and therefore linking struggles between climate justice and Palestinian liberation. Similarly, the Stop JCB is exposing how British corporations are profiting from destruction, both from demolitions happening in Palestine, but also that same machinery is being used, or from that same company is being used to dismantle people's homes in India and land in Kashmir. So connecting these kind of global sites of oppression. Today, I'm coming home from an action where we were confronting the far right attacks in the South Asian Muslim community, and our Palestinian brothers and sisters and siblings really stood alongside us. And as we were walking, marching down the streets, there was a joint marches against anti-fascism for free Palestine. And it was just really beautiful to see the recognition of fight against Zionism and fascism is really one and the same struggle. And just lastly, the one I'll mention is Prisoners for Palestine. It's a new campaign and has seen over 20 political prisoners in Britain begin an open-ended hunger strike. Detained for resisting the Zionist arms trade, they are demanding justice and the shutdown of opiate system, which I think is just so beautiful to how they're using their bodies from the inside, from being imprisoned into frontline and the joint struggle with both prisons and also the occupation. And just to end, for a long time, the dominant strand of much of our organizing has been single issue agendas. I found when I was organizing for things, I was in this group for doing this and that group for doing that. But I feel like we are now in a very unique juncture of our history where we can see border coalitions forming and organizing, and the expansion of joint struggle frameworks and the unity and understanding and resistance of shared oppressions. And we need to and can use this momentum of Palestine solidarity movement to really build a project to counter the ironclad political consensus of militarism and importance of really joint struggle. And I think that's really the way to get there. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Wow, that's so much to unpack there. And I appreciate how you highlighted, I mean, both like the really dire situation that we are facing and like really the sharp end of the sword there, but also then what you are taking some inspiration from. There's lots more I want to ask you about. But first, I'm really excited to welcome Mohammed Houreini, a Palestinian journalist, activist, and human rights defender, also the co-founder of Youth of Sumud. For those who've been paying attention to the schedule, you may have noticed that it was Sami who was on the schedule. Mohammed is his brother, and we're so grateful to him for stepping up and to joining us on this panel in place of his brother Sami. A warm welcome to you, Mohammed, and we can't wait to hear what you have to share with us today.
Hello, hello everyone. Thank you, Rachel, for introducing me. I'm honestly inspired by the speakers who are speaking and what all the work they're doing, and happy to be with all of you to share also some of the work that we have been going and doing as Palestinians living under occupation for decades. I'm Mohammed Houreini. I'm 21 years old, a human rights activist who were like born in Masafriyatta, which is a community that lies in the southern tip of the West Bank and that faces ongoing ethnic cleansing and forced displacement by Israel. Okay, just to explain, I need to just to give an info, like a general info, just to get deep into the point of what we are doing right now. Actually, like I'm a refugee on my homeland. Like I'm a third generation Nakba survivor, where my grandparents have been like forcibly displaced in 1948 from their homes and fled to the West Bank, where I was born now in Masafriyatta. And after the 6/7 invasion of the West Bank, Israel has followed many policies in order to fragment the Palestinian communities and cities from each other and impose multiple policies in order to push the people out of their homes. What we are facing right now, like they declared half of like all of my community as a firing zone, which is this policy have been initiated by a person called Ariel Sharon. Maybe most of you know him. Ariel Sharon is the former prime minister, then the agriculture minister of Israel in 1967. And when he says that as the initiated person of the firing zone, it was all intended for one purpose, which is to provide an opportunity for Jewish settlements in the area. But when we go to the Israel's propaganda and how it's imposed on the Western countries by the complicity of your governments, that Israel is saying that Palestinians are living already in a dangerous places for military firing zone for Israeli army. But in fact, they are denying the entire historic context of Palestine building there long before they declared as a firing zone. So my community have been declared as a firing zone in early 80s, and so living in certain areas, you are denied from the basic human rights as a human being. You are denied from having a house, electricity, water, essential infrastructures. So this is like kind of the life, because there every day, every single week, there are home demolitions in my community. People are still living in caves until today and tents because of they are denied from having a shelter. And caves and tents are the last refuge for people to remain resilient against this oppression that we have been facing for long ago. I mean, my grandma, she had to raise her kids by her own. And after this policy that has been imposed in my community and facing a new chapter of the Nakba that started in 1948, so she found that the solution is not by always running away, but facing this oppression and regime and resist it. And she followed the nonviolent resistance means against this occupation. She raised her like my father, and she also like inspired the community of following this path. And actually, we are still fighting until today. She have paid the highest price for this, and we as a new generation who like were born and see how our people have been facing and fighting. And I think most of you have already it's like saw the No Other Land film that was made by my cousin Basil Adara. So, I mean, we have born amid this injustices and occupation and oppression, settler violence, night raids. So they are dealing with us as a numbers who are denied, didn't have the right to exist even. In the new Israeli soldiers who are like coming to train, they're training them on our houses. How they just give an orders for these soldiers just to go in this house, this family, just terrorize them, take them out, and make the house upside down and then leave. Like this is part of the policy that they are using against Palestinians. Of course, people already like rebuild their homes 3 times or 4 times, or some people 11 times because they demolish, and people are still catching in their right of living on their own land. While Palestinians are denied from having a house and shelters and rights, next to us there is an illegal settlements and outposts that's established on our stolen land. Like 300 meters away where I'm now talking to you, there is the settlement of Maun that was firstly established as a military base, then it was turned into a settlement, and then they have been bringing settlers and settle from different countries. We can find from Germany, South Africa after the apartheid regime fell there, Germany, the US as well. So these people who come and settle here, they have rights more than I do as indigenous people person. They are protected, and they are not only living, but they are a tool for the settler colonial project that started to continue and to oppress Palestinians. They are armed, trained to be released on Palestinian communities and attack them. I think most of you have seen many videos on social media on how it's going on. So I started to be an activist at 13 years old, actually, because living in such a risk of in this such a reality, you grow mentally more than physically, actually, and you cannot just look at what's going on and not taking an action. I have been seeing my family being threatened, attacked, arrested many times in order to shut down, because Israel is working hard to shut down anyone who dares speak out against Israel's atrocities that's going on the ground. And we have seen the genocide in Gaza. More than almost 300 journalists have been slaughtered just for showing what's going on on the ground. So me and my brother Sami, my father, who was supporting us, we gathered youth from different villages, from both gender, and from different villages in my community. We started our group, Youth of Samud, in a village that was forcibly displaced in 1999 by the Israeli military. The idea was to encourage the people to come to their village again after they were forcibly displaced, and to recreate the life in that village, to provoke the plan of a settlement expansion, and to strengthen the resilience of our people, not only in my community but in the entire West Bank. So actually, since we started in 2017, we left our families. We lived in caves, and this our experience was luckily documented by a film called Sarura: The Future is an Unknown Place. So actually, we left our families and we lived in the caves. We restored the caves. We planted many trees. And of course, that was not easy because just 500 meters away from that place, there is also the illegal outpost of Havat Ma'on, where every day, every week, there are attacks by settlers and the night raids by the army. Every one of us has paid a high price for that. Or being arrested. My brother, he was going to lose his leg because settlers were driving on him. And for sure, at the end, the settlers go with impunity. There is no accountability for them because this is what Israel government wants, actually. Then we didn't stop at some point, and we were like really carrying the vision of, because we are following the steps for our believing in our rights and liberation and freedom, and as a people who should have rights as many people of this world who are living in freedom and justice. So our activism has expanded during that time. I started to accompany school kids who are like even fighting daily to get an education. They were my colleagues actually because I was 13 and I was like, even studying at school. They used to have to like pass risky roads close to the settlements to come to my village to educate in the school. And I used to accompany them to document the daily abuses against these children and the demolitions that's happening around. I have been arrested 5 times in 1 month just because of being like accompanying these kids when I was in that time. We used to do like campaigns like Fazza campaign. I don't know, maybe most of you were one of the organizers of this campaign that helps the Palestinian farmers to pick their olives, to protect and try to be with them. Also defund racism that focuses on the Israeli, that shows themselves that they are charity organizations, but in fact they are a part of the ethnic cleansing policy against Palestinians. For example, Ragavim organization that's been funded by the US government with millions of dollars, that's following the Palestinian buildings. Any Palestinian who tried to build a shelter for his family on his land, they will just follow it and document it and send it to the Israeli civil administration. Don't mind if I use the civil word, but it's not civil at all because we're literally living under military rule. And then the Israeli military occupation will come and demolish that easily. Just to explain of how the system is going on the ground. As I said, now I'm living in the village of Altwani. Just next to me, there is the settlement of Maon. I'm living under military rule. Settlers living under civil rule. And if we are trying to fight legally against this occupation, actually, you're just going to, it's like, let's say, as a Palestinian proverb, that you're digging the water, that no result will come out. Because simply when you go to the military courts in Offer, which is even established on a story in Palestinian land, you are going to face the judge who's a settler actually living in the West Bank, trying to evacuate another communities from their homes. So actually, you are going to face your executioner that you never will get the justice from. We have been like literally like followed and harassed by Israel. Just to what last month, my house was raided twice by the Israeli forces and their intelligence. They have been threatening my family, and because me and my brother were just like continuing and mobilizing and showing what's going on and helping my community on going on with our resilience against this oppression. Luckily, we were not at home at that times, and we were like, I was traveling and doing like an advocacy tour for Palestine, and like right now, it's totally like a period of silencing everyone who's speaking about Israel's atrocities. And our center, I don't know, maybe if you heard about it or not, our guest house, which is the center of our group, just next to my house in the village of Twani, is under threat of being demolished. Even my village is the only village that got a master plan, which is allowed us to build. But Israel won't let us go freely with our, let's say, privileges, but which privileges that we have? Nothing. They come out with a new policy of archaeological site. So if this house and this center got demolished, it will be normalizing the rest of my village being demolished while everything is legally built. In the Israeli law, I mean, we're already indigenous people who are in the Israeli law who are denied from even existing on our land. the idea of demolishing this place, which is a place that was hosting parliaments, politicians from all over the world, activists who are like we are start organizing everything from this place that's supporting the entire community, and it's a way of trying to oppress more and more. And right now we're just going on with what we are with what we have started, and we are still paying the price. My community is still, and the West Bank still under this settler terrorism and military occupation. And just we have here the ceasefire in Gaza just now has we have seen it, but actually turns to the West Bank now. Already during the genocide, Israel has taken advantage during that and the absence of media coverage. They have taken advantage and steal more lots of Palestinian lands and spreading their illegal outposts and settlements and spreading the settler tourism. And I have lost a friend just 2 months ago, Audel Hadalin, who was shot in his village by Israeli settler Yunon Levy, who was sanctioned by the EU. And just 1 week later of murdering Audi, he came back to the same village, continuing his work to expand their illegal settlements and outposts on that land under the protection of the Israeli military. So this is how, like, I mean, they are dealing with criminals by rewarding them and making them as a symbol of heroes in the Israeli society, actually. And there is at the end there is no justice for this. And this has been going not just today; it's been going on for decades ago. That was like a systematic program that was set up for Palestinians just to make the life for them unbearable. Uh, just as I said, just to memorize again that what we are doing right now is just a continuation of our struggle against this occupation. I always remember what my father has said me, that this path is always there's a price to pay, and the last price for you is your life. And it's it could be not my friend Aude, it could be me, it could be other Palestinian who's under this occupation. And the problem is that in these days we have been, and the world has already normalized hearing Palestinian being slaughtered in daily basis. And we can see how this system is. I don't know how to express about the global system that we are living in nowadays, because it was already, we have laws, international law, we have already like resolutions to prevent such atrocities against humanity, but always fail. It never stands up for people's rights. And who can actually make it work is the people of this world, not the governments. Because what I can see, the governments are just a machine of controlling people, and it's not a way of how it fits humanity. Yeah, I mean, I have no words to say more, but thank you for listening. And if you have any questions and thoughts, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you so much, Mohammed, for sharing all that, and I'm so sorry about your friend and about all the losses in your life and your community that you shared about recently. I actually would love to start by giving any of the three panelists who just spoke a chance if you have any questions for each other, or if there's something someone said that you wanted to respond to or build on.
I would be curious. I think one of the tensions that I was talking about in my talk, and I hear it coming up in what both of you are saying, is this tension about there's a really common like call for people to obey international law or the laws of our countries. And I think for me, that sometimes feels like a dead end because these laws were created by colonial institutions and they tend to protect those I don't see them protecting people. I see them protecting countries and like governments and the people who like the rich people who like run those things. So I'm just kind of curious, like what, if you see that in your context and how people are talking about that in our movements in your context, or like how people are working with that. It's a very understandable reaction. But I think for me, like I get it, but it's also like it feels almost naive about the nature of the systems sometimes. And maybe I want to call for like a deeper kind of solidarity that doesn't rely on these things that I don't think are ever going to work for us. So anyway, I'm curious if you all want to respond to that. For me, this is like part of what's so interesting about this conference's framing around abolition.
Actually, you're right, and I was not like I don't want to go into this because maybe most of you will get it because no need to explain. But we can see how this, like, to be honest, we have seen the failure of the humanity during the Holocaust, actually, and right after the Holocaust, there was the international law was created, the UN resolutions, in order to prevent such atrocities, actually. But right after this, in 1948, the catastrophe of Palestinian people happens. And if we just look onto the history of how the double standards of dealing with humanity, with human beings in this world, we can see that it's applied for some people and people not. Let's take Iraq as an example. Iraq was like invaded. Thousands of innocent people were killed during that, and I don't know the Iraq. How many UN resolutions has violated? 10, 20, 30. Let's say 30, but Israel has violated more than 60 UN resolutions. We can see what happens now. We can see literally what happens. I mean, also during the votes in the EU and the UN, which to stop the genocidal war in Gaza, the US was already like always just giving this vote against stopping the genocide, and it goes for 2 years. So like it seems that our lives is just controlled by people who, whenever they wanna wipe us out or not. So it shows that this system is he like valued the human being, but it's not actually working for human being. It's working for agendas, for some interests, and that's it.
I don't think I can add much more to how, in a lovely way, you both have summarized that. I just love, Mohammed, when you said we already have the laws that shouldn't allow such atrocities. Like, and it really gets me thinking about, oh, my baby's just come home. It really gets me thinking about, okay, the genocide of people, we shouldn't even have to be thinking about, like that's just a given. But even like layering down to horrific things still, but like sometimes we have, for example, feminist groups asking for stronger laws to prevent sexual abuse or that kind of stuff. We've seen in Britain recently there being like a rise and a request for that, and there were requests for there being stronger laws against certain violence against women. And I think it's just that, like, if we can get people to understand that we already have all the laws that we need in place and they're not working, and therefore let's try something else. And sometimes I think people understand that the laws aren't working. That's why they're asking for something else. They're asking for more, like Dean, you was talking about how like people want their safety, like they're asking for something. And unfortunately, it is the case that like our imagination, the way that our world building is, it's like the laws are just a given and they're there. And I feel like the role of abolitionists, therefore, is to try and get people to imagine something more than that, and to want more than that, and to demand more than that. Because yeah, the laws aren't working. They haven't worked. And once you start talking about like money, I feel like in the British context seems to work about like austerity and like, okay, if these laws are meant to be working, they're spending more and more and more every year. Why is everything getting worse and worse and worse every year? So that argument seems to work quite well as like a one-on-one intro to get people thinking about things. But yeah, certainly a conversation about imagination, I think, is maybe where we need to do a bit more thinking around how we bring people along.
Yeah, this question about, laws and pushing to change laws and all this. It's a chronic and important question always, and it's like very potent in the organizing that and so I noticed some other people in the audience are doing in Canada right now as part of a really big and robust campaign to get Canada to impose an arms embargo on Israel. And in some cases, we are holding up the arms trade treaty, which was, a piece of global law that was worked for very, very hard by grassroots folks all around the world directly impacted by this kind of violence to try to create some means of limiting the flow of weapons to genocidal states, right? And so forth. And so here we're in this awkward position where we're sort of saying, well, Canada, you actually have signed on to this and you're not following it. And so trying to hold them to international law at the same time as not, as you so deftly put, Dean, like making it seem like, oh, well, this is just a small policy tweak. And if Canada, as a settler colonial state that obviously very closely identifies with Israel and wants to support Israel, oh, but if you just kind of tweak your adherence to this law, then we'll be all good. Like, that's clearly not it either. But like, are there ways that we can sort of strategically use these legal tools when it serves us, but not do so in a way that holds up these institutions as our savior? And right now we're actually campaigning like a new bill that we helped write is being introduced in Parliament in Canada to further strengthen Canada's arms trade law so there will not be loopholes that are continuing to allow weapons to go to Israel. And it is an interesting balance to at the same time be, trying to convince our members of Parliament to vote for this law, to tweak this, yes, like fundamentally violent and completely messed up system, at the same time as we're also like blockading weapons factories and doing direct action this and it's not always clear to me like whether we are striking this balance, whether we actually can be using these tactics that both undermine the state, some that maybe inadvertently like hold up the state like in ways that are actually all pushing in the same direction. And maybe kind of a related thing, I'm seeing some of what's being shared in the chat and some like debates about the ideas of like violence and nonviolence. I did hear you, Dean, earlier sort of saying like we can't use the states BS definitions of violence to divide us, to isolate some protesters from others, or to make it seem like some are the good ones and some are the bad ones. And like they are the ones that control so often, especially in media, the definition of what's violence and nonviolence. I mean, World Beyond War for itself has like a nonviolent stance, which does not mean that we collaborate with the police and what they want to call violent or nonviolent or law-abiding or so forward. But some of World Beyond War stance centers their work in our work in scholars like Maria Stefan or Erica Chenoweth, like with an like sort of underscoring ideas of nonviolent resistance. But I think that something that comes up in this panel and also in our movements is that we don't all have the same ideas. We're not all going to agree with each other on the best ways to approach things, on the best ways to win. And I think this comes up a lot in abolitionist struggle, especially. And I guess I want to hear from all of you, like how do you navigate this? Like, do you feel that there is a way for us to make sure we're actually all pointing to the same horizon of abolition, even if we're working in different ways and we don't actually all agree with each other? Or like however you want to kind of engage with that question? Or do you feel like actually we all need to like read the same books and agree in the same ways always?
I'll say a few things about that. I mean, I think that's why my framework is solidarity. It's one thing to be like, we all disagree. It's another thing if I undermine your work or create a narrative that justifies the repression you're experiencing. And I think a lot of people use nonviolence language in ways that they are not acknowledging actually supports the marginalization of other people in the struggle. And this has often been racially divided in the US, where white organizers have used nonviolence language in ways that legitimize the criminalization of people of color and colonized people doing self-defense. And so I think this is a pretty big deal. And I think a lot of people in the anti-war movement may need to investigate how those terms have traveled and do travel, and how they're often tied to a form of liberalism that pretends that we can convince these governments, these settler colonial governments, to stop doing what they were designed to do, and what, in my opinion, all capitalist states are designed to do. So I would say, in terms of the question of how do we assess whether a reform is, when we're asking the state for something, I love what you're saying, Rachel, like, right, the danger of us legitimizing its processes by doing legislation and court stuff with them. And I think we do a kind of assessment, and I've used 4 criteria for that in the past. One, will this actually make material change? Because the government of Canada has like issued like apologies to Indigenous people. That stuff is bullshit, right? So any kind of, declarations of non-discrimination, declarations of peacefulness, that are just totally for legitimizing the government and have no material outcome for our people, we got to see that for what it is. That's just like them doing PR. Does what we're asking for legitimize or expand their systems? So, for example, in the abolitionist movement, we oppose hate crime legislation, or like Hajera was talking about, we oppose further criminalization of sexual violence that will just be used to expand the sexually violent criminal system. So this is this kind of assessment, like, is this thing going to build their thing? Or is it going to, what's it going to do? The third thing we ask is, does this divide people into deserving and undeserving? So in the abolition movement, we ask things like, does this, like, only if you have a nonviolent charge will you get this relief, or only if you don't have an immigration issue, like, is it making our communities into like, these are the good ones and these are the bad ones? We always want to avoid that, because that's a divide and conquer. And then we always want to ask, is the way we're organizing this, and this really gets to it with a legislative question, is the way we're organizing this building our capacity for like mass mobilization? Because we're not going to win by asking our oppressors to change their mind. So it's like, it's not just what we're doing, but how are we doing it? Are we doing it in a way that gets lots of people to become mobilized actors in their communities to do immediate work for change and to be in solidarity with lots of people all over the world? Or is it like a behind closed doors policy thing that just like some lawyers are doing? And a lot of legislation and court stuff brings us there. So just like, how can we do this in a way that builds our capacity for the next fight more? I would say one question that I think is really visible in our movements is, what is the pedagogy of our protest practice? Does our protest practice say, we're going to get out there and ask our oppressors to please change their minds, and we're going to have a good policy report and show up and be promised that we're the biggest patriots in the country, like this kind of stuff? Or is our protest practice recruit people to our movements and say, you know what, things are bad. You're scared for a reason. Join us. The target of, we're hoping to, yes, we're hoping to pressure change, but we're not hoping to convince change. We're not being as legitimate as we can and as kind and peaceful, and because it's like, that actually doesn't work, because they know what they're doing. So I know that what I'm saying might feel actually like a little hard for this audience, and I just encourage you all to consider it. There's some pretty big divides in our movements over this stuff, and we've got to consider these positions.
I'm a little nervous because, Dean, you just ended with some of what you said. Feels a little hard. So maybe what I'm going to say, please forgive me, and we might have a difference in opinion. First and foremost, I think we all have various different skills, and we come from different places, and we all have different experiences, and we are all trying to make the world better, right? And I do acknowledge that. But when it comes to the question of like expanding a movement and therefore having to be non-violent to enable the expansion of the movement, it makes me wonder, whose movement are you trying to expand, and who are you trying to bring along without talking about violence? Because when my community, Black and Brown, I live in Tower Hamlets, it's like a council state. I don't know what the equivalent sorry, forgive me for my lack of language, what the equivalent in America is, but when the police come here, you call them because you need them, they don't turn up. When they come, it's because they're here to beat people up. You cannot tell people here that the police are going to keep you safe. And if you told them that, they'll laugh in your face. So when people are met with a fascist group telling them they're going to come and keep them off, like take them out of the street, the people are not calling for the police to keep them safe. They're coming out and they are going to be saying self-defense is no offense. That's just what we're taught. It's what our uncles, grandparents, 70s, 80s were doing. There's actually really amazing examples of, I'll maybe share a link if you're interested, of like how young Asian youth movement, young lads were able to go to the courts and actually win on the defense. Self-defense is no offense. And like, to me, that is, it might sound like, also, like when we're talking about the idea of Palestine, and we have Mohammed here who's talking about his homes being continuously being broken into, people have to rebuild their homes, and then we're sitting here talking about non-violence. Just doesn't it's, you know, are people in Palestine expected to be non-violent, and we here are expected to just protest from A to B? Are we not meant to take on any of the risk on ourselves? Is it just meant to be people over there who take on the risk of the violence, and we just follow nice little marches? Have our marches got us anywhere? Mohammed brought up the Iraq War. Over 2 million people were in London streets. They still went ahead. So I think there's, yeah, a lot of questions to be had. I think there's a variety of different ways to get things done. And like, it's up for each of us to think about where our skills are and where we can get stuff done. But number one thing, as Dean has said, do not throw your comrades under the bus. If you think what they're doing is not for you, that's not for you. Leave it at that. You don't have to go out there and do it. But do not be going on social media being like, oh, they're making it worse for all of us, or all the other stuff that I've seen people say, oh, they should have stayed at home, these thugs, these this, these that. People are just doing their very best to enable their space to be safe, even if that's not how you're doing it. And I think that's just my main 101. Just don't throw anyone under the bus.
Mohammed, feel free to turn on video and come on if there's something that you want to say, but maybe in the meanwhile, I'll kind of throw another question that what you were just bringing up kind of was making me think about. I mean, I think that in the face of, I mean, all of you in various degrees have really talked about, yeah, just uh, this particular moment of violence, of growing fascism, of authoritarianism, of the use of terrorism laws, like just this a feeling of kind of, yeah, like real bleakness in this moment. And I think, yeah, there can be like an impulse sometimes in the face of really deep horror and these attacks to like to hold back or to kind of lean into reforms or to think all we can ask for kind of is crumbs or to have like a sense of scarcity in our movements. Like, oh, of course I care about my neighbors and their struggles important too, but like, oh my God, we're so under attack. Like we can barely keep our own thing going. I mean, in Canada, we have a kind of brand new government that has done this sort of thing where, in fact, like fascist Steve Bannon called it flooding the zone, like passed like 10 new laws in a month to catch everyone off guard and put people on the real defensive to defend their community. So I guess I'm curious in this type of a moment where it feels like we are losing ground in many cases, or things are certainly no better than they have been and probably worse. But there is this sense of scarcity. Yeah, where have you seen people leaning into solidarity, or how would you like to kind of respond to that moment? Because I think for some people, abolition can feel like, oh, well, wouldn't that be nice? But that's like a luxury that we don't have in this really urgent moment.
I don't think it's a luxury. I mean, to me, it's just like there's a way in which sometimes people will call those of us who are border abolitionists or prison abolitionists or war abolitionists like idealistic. And, I think is what you're saying, Rachel, or they'll tell us that we're not pragmatic. And actually, our work is the most pragmatic. We're like, oh, wait, if we don't have this analysis, our concerns will be used to build more of their stuff, right? So like if we have a feminist analysis and it's not anti-war, then people will try to be like, this war is going to be good for women, right? So we have to know, right? Or if we have like if we are like, wow, we hate that the cops show up all the time in our communities and kill people and hurt people who are having a mental health crisis, then the system will respond by being like, oh, we'll train the cops not to do that. If we don't have an abolitionist analysis that knows that no amount of training changes what the police inherently do, and of course, the training won't work, and all the other decades of police training have only expanded policing, then we will keep falling into the same traps. So, to me, an abolitionist analysis, which requires us to really understand that these governments are defined by their policing and border and war strategies. They're not like accidentally, they don't accidentally have policing and border and wars. That is what they are. They also do a little bits of care here and there, but they really just do that to legitimize and shut us up. A little health service sometimes not that good, little old age thing, Their main business is imperialism and war and policing. And they're not to be convinced to do something else. If we act nice enough and show up in just the right ways, they will still do it. So how would you act if a homicidal, ecocidal maniac were running everything? That's how we have to act. We're not negotiating with them. We're stopping them. And what does that mean? That's not easy because they have all the money and the guns. And the only thing we have is all life on Earth. That's what is at stake. And so, yeah, like I really am saying, like, I think people might need to use a diversity of tactics. And I am never going to judge other people's methods of defending life, who are in solidarity in these fundamental ways. And I love what you were saying, Hajera, about like, we don't need to agree on everything. We just really need to not sell each other out, have really productive, difficult discussions. Absolutely. Try to convince each other of our positions because none of us is right. We're all learning and like kind of stick our necks out into greater boldness, like into like, could I take a bigger risk and could I get out of the way if someone else is taking a bigger risk?
I don't know if I'm adding just for the sake of adding, but everything you've said, Dean, and maybe also the linking of struggles. So when we're thinking about, okay, we're working on this, what else is this linked to and who can we be collaborating with? Excuse me, who can we be collaborating with to reach our goals? Who can we be organizing with? Often you'll see it's like the same, if you're like fighting against a certain company, they're doing the same thing to other people. If you're organizing in a certain area or a certain issue, that community's also got multiple issues that are connected, which has another issue like behind it. So there's a way of like connecting people so that we're all not just in silos, and like this resource scarcity that you're talking about, if we can like in theory work together and kind of join our resources. Everyone who I know who's organizing right now is organizing on like multiple different groups. Like we're all doing so much because there's just so much to be done. And as our groups are getting like more and more like, actually, we're just going to join. There's no point having the same people in so many different things. It just gets better. And I think, and I've said it before, so sorry for repeating, but like Palestine in itself, the last 2 years here in the UK has been a great tool in like getting people thinking about that. And we should continue thinking about that. Like they shouldn't end with Palestine. So like we've been able to use Palestine example to talk about South Asian internationalism and like get people thinking, some of the young people that we're working with to think about that and how can all the various things that are impacting them here in London connect back to Bangladesh, Kashmir, Pakistan, like that kind of thing. So yeah, I don't know if that was like a lot of word vomit, but just the idea of like connecting people and causes and sharing.
Absolutely. Okay, so I admit I lost track of the time a little bit because I was so lost in this conversation. I want to give Mohammed a chance to share any last thoughts that he would like to share before we wrap up. Yeah.
I'm sorry, guys. Just I maybe lost some questions and some thoughts, but just I was outside because there was some soldiers around, so I didn't hear anything. So if there's just I heard the Hager. She was saying something, but I didn't get the entire question.
Well, we're just right now at the end. So if there's any kind of last words that you wanted to share, we were talking about a bunch of different things like well, one thing we were talking about is how like sometimes we actually do have kind of different ideas, but can we all agree that we're not going to throw each other under the bus, that we're going to have a real deep adhesion to solidarity and to trying to move together? I don't think I can summarize the last 20 minutes of conversation in this last minute here. Sorry, I tried to start, but I think that yeah, lots of talk about like how do we actually not compromise on our values when it matters and not let the state kind of like scare us into holding back or only asking for a little. Like if we want a free Palestine, we don't just say stop shooting us. Like I think some of that is what's coming up, but I'd love to hear
Yeah.
whatever you'd like to end with.
Yeah, I mean to talk in this level, like it's kind of every people are controlled by their governments, and it's in every act that you wanna take to or step you wanna take to change is you're going to pay a price. Anybody of us, anybody, doesn't matter if you are from wherever, because if you're trying to go to change some system that was set up for that is serving agendas for other people, like governments and rich people. It's something that we are going to face. Something like at some point it comes to us. It's impossible to change. But in fact, that we are the people who are like at somehow we are the one who's putting these people in power, and this way it needs unity. And we have a proverb that says one hand cannot clap, two hands can, which means of how we can unite our efforts and to face this global system that is really reigning, like ruining every human values that that should help for a good future and just future. Firstly, we need to change from our society itself. We need to change our people first. Then we can change the governments, because when we talk about governments, most of the governments are supported by also parts of its people, and this is our like this is our goal and our I don't know how to say it in English, but our duty to change this ideology and these people, because these people were already uh, washed by their governments. And we have seen like media like the important thing is the media is playing a very important role of justifying the daily killing. I mean, we have your media is already complicit, and we have seen so many ads during the genocide that there was like trying to say that there is no famine in Gaza and there is no genocide. This is a way of some controlling of us, and the problem is that's creating the the different visions of our people, because people are believing in what their governments are saying, and people are not, because the people who are not believing, they are already experiencing and already seeing on what's going on. They have, maybe most of the people have already been in Palestine and seen what's going on other oppressed people land.
Thank you. And I'm so glad you were able to rejoin this talk at the end. Dean or Hajera, if there's any like last words that either of you want to share. I know you've also shared so much, but I want to just give a space for a last few words for everyone.
Maybe I can say also one thing is about the new generation. To be honest, I'm like betting on the new generation that is growing, and it's our duty to have to give them the truth, because they are the one who's going to lead the world, and which is, I mean, it's for a long-term vision, but I think it's the most uh, possible thing, because nowadays as a people we have no power, but we are now processing into changing what's the system is. And the new generation is the one who's going, if it follows the same ideology of our governments, I mean, it will just go on.
Absolutely. And I know one thing I take, I mean, hope is a loaded word, but one thing that keeps me going is recognizing that like it actually takes just an astonishing amount of propaganda, like thousands of people around the world, I don't know the exact number, whose full-time job is to convince us all that what we need is these institutions of state violence. Like this is not actually common sense. This is not actually natural. This is not actually what most people think. It takes so much propaganda to convince us all that these police, these prisons, these militaries, this colonization is the way things are and the way things are going to be. And I think I mean, I agree with you, Mohammed, and I think more and more people actually are seeing through that. And I think that like all we have is each other, but also we have each other, which is everything. And I just have so much appreciation to the three of you for sharing like so honestly and vulnerably here today with all of us, and to the audience who joined us here today and the many people around the world who I know will watch this recording on their own time zones as well. So a huge thank you again to Dean, to Mohammed, to Hajera, and all our solidarity and love to all you and all of your struggles, and especially to you, Mohammed, in this really terrifying and horrifying moment that you're living through.
Well, thank you all, guys, and yeah, we need to just to keep the work on. So thank you so much, and hopefully, yeah, at some point we can do something big together and change